I'm going to tell you why the Supreme Court's decision did not end the fight for women's sports and protecting girls' spaces, and what you can do about it, both as an American and as a Christian and kingdom witness for Jesus Christ. First, let's review the Supreme Court case and talk about what the justices actually said. So, this one Supreme Court case was actually a consolidation of two cases, and the cases were evaluating laws from both Idaho and West Virginia. So transgender students, that is males and boys who were competing in girls' sports or wanted to, sued Idaho and West Virginia for enacting laws that said that only girls can compete in sports with girls, which seems pretty simple. So the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit held that Idaho's law violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause because it was intended to, quote, categorically ban transgender women and girls from public school sports teams that correspond with their gender identity. So the law, the Ninth Circuit said, discriminated on the basis of sex. Now, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, that's the circuit that encompasses West Virginia, said the law violated Title IX, which is a federal civil rights law that bars sex discrimination and educational programs and activities that receive federal funding. Now, this is craziness because we know that Title IX was intended to protect women's sports. It was the law that created women's sports and allowed women to compete against only women so they would have fair competition. But either way, let's move on to what the justices actually said. So this was a 6-3 opinion. That means there were 6 justices for, 3 against, definitely divided on ideological lines, with all of the liberals dissenting from this decision. So Justice Kavanaugh delivered their opinion. He wrote the opinion for the court, and he said men and women have inherent physical differences that are, quote, relevant to athletic performance. That is things like height, weight, strength, speed, endurance, and jumping ability. As a result of these differences, he said, forcing female athletes to compete against males can create significant safety risks in contact sports. He also said in virtually all competitive sports, forcing female athletes to compete against males can undermine competitive fairness. And he continued, schools therefore typically maintain separate women's and men's sports teams. So that's pretty standard language. I think it's very practical for him to recognize this, for the majority to recognize these biological facts and the differences between men and women. So he concluded, the opinion concludes that Idaho and West Virginia's laws do not violate Title IX or the Constitution. So he explains that Title IX bars discrimination on the basis of sex, but the regulations that implement the law expressly permit schools to maintain separate teams for members of each sex. So what does that actually mean? It means that Title IX does bar discrimination on the basis of sex, but it doesn't ban you from separating the sexes and recognizing that they are inherently different. So that's what Kavanaugh and the majority are saying in this part. So he continued, the Title IX regulations allowed separate sports teams precisely because of the biological differences between the sexes, right? So it can't be discrimination, unlawful discrimination, to separate the sexes, males and females, when the law calls for that kind of separation. Another quote, whether biological males may participate on women's and girls' sports teams may be a debated policy question. That means it's a question designed for lawmakers like the legislature or Congress. He continues, but the legal question for Title IX purposes is whether West Virginia may limit women's and girls' sports teams to biological females. As a matter of text and history, West Virginia may do so, Kavanaugh concluded. All right, so this is pretty standard stuff. He's outlining what Title IX says and the fact that Title IX created these separate sports in the first place, while also barring sex discrimination, meaning they can't be the same. So it can't be sex discrimination to separate men and women. This is a quote from Justice Clarence Thomas's concurring opinion. So he joined the majority opinion, but also wrote a separate opinion that's called concurring because he agrees with the majority. He says, quote, men and boys with gender dysphoria are not women or girls. Quote, even if they believe that they are. Sex is an immutable biological characteristic. It is binary, and men and women, boy and girl, are the terms that correspond to adults and children of each sex. To use language to obscure reality, to show indifference regarding the truth, is to lie to the public and cease to treat our fellow citizens as equals. This is a powerful point that Justice Thomas is making here, and I'll come back to a little later, because this idea that just because someone feels a certain way, that means we have to use language to suit those feelings is not the way we should be making law and policy. So in her dissenting opinion, Justice Sotomayor actually agreed that West Virginia's ban, or the states, both the states, their bans on males competing against girls did not violate Title IX. So the dissent actually agrees with that point. Okay. Well, we're glad you agree with the law. But she also said that the other side, this is during the oral arguments, the transgender students actually agreed with the state that sex does mean biological sex. And because they agreed with that, then there can't be a violation of Title IX. But her argument is that there is an unresolved factual dispute over whether athletes, transgender athletes, who have never gone through puberty, because one of these students who challenged the laws was on puberty blockers. And her argument is that, are those students who haven't gone through puberty similarly situated, that is closely related to biological girls? She uses the term cisgender girls, which is a biological girl, or just a girl. Okay, we don't need to say cisgender, especially not in the Supreme Court opinion, but whatever, I digress. And so she says that this fact is actually an important part of whether excluding transgender students, these boys, from participating in sports advances the state's interest. So all she's really saying there, just to kind of break it down, is that it does matter whether students who have never, males who've never gone through puberty, are similar to girls biologically in any way, which is obviously crazy and not true. And so that's the dissent's argument. They're actually not disputing that these laws violate Title IX. They're not making the argument that the laws violate Title IX. And that's at least something, because they clearly do not violate the law. But there's more going on here. And I want to make it really clear. If you're an American, if you're a Christian, you need to understand what's happening. The fact that this case is about whether states can ban boys from competing with girls is kind of crazy. That means biology, reality, what we knew to be true from the time humanity began, was on the defensive here. The states who said, no, boys can't compete with girls, we're going to separate them, they had to prove that what they were doing was not a violation of the law, when really it should be the other way around. The case really should be about whether it violates Title IX for boys to compete against girls. That means states like California and New York and a lot of other liberal states who are allowing boys to take these opportunities from girls, they are actually violating Title IX. And that's what this case should be about. There are some cases going on right now about that. The Trump administration has sued some of these states. And so we'll see what happens when the sort of reverse question is presented to the Supreme Court, hopefully soon. But the fact that we were forced to defend reality in the U.S. Supreme Court is pretty alarming. The practice of allowing boys to compete with girls is a violation of Title IX and should be banned throughout the entire country. It's true that actually part of the Save America Act, the act that Donald Trump is really trying to push right now, which requires voter ID and proof that you're a U.S. citizen before you vote, that act actually also includes provisions to ban this practice throughout the nation. But there are broader issues here that as an American, especially as a Christian, that you should be concerned with. And any kingdom witness, and you can learn all about this and the link in the description below, but I'm going to break this down. Any kingdom witness should be always concerned with 4 things. Those 4 things are reverence, identity, conscience, and influence. So whenever you're evaluating any sort of cultural issue, and as a constitutional lawyer and a Christian, I go through this process every time I encounter a new issue that I want to evaluate and see what's the Christian view of this. How should I look at this? And those are the 4 things that always come up, and those are the 4 things that I use as a kingdom witness to evaluate cultural issues. Again, they are reverence, identity, conscience, and influence. So relevant to transgender ideology in general, you can walk through this issue using these 4 pillars and come to the conclusion that this ideology is not something Christians can ever support. So let's run through it. For reverence, if you fear God, you believe that he made male and female, and that's it. And humans are not in control of that choice, and your feelings do not change that choice. God's choice. The second is identity. Fearing God produces an acceptance of what God has decided. And that means that we accept that he has decided our sex. And no amount of emotional or mental dissonance is going to change that. We must accept what God has decided. And part of that acceptance is accepting our identity and who God says we are, not who we think we are. Conscience is next. And this comes in particularly for this issue about transgender ideology, because there is a consequence to this ideology that people often don't want to acknowledge. And that consequence means that here there is real serious harm happening to girls and women because of this ideology. Boys and men who are competing against women are not just taking those roles from women, not taking these championships and opportunities from women that include scholarships and things that women have worked very hard to achieve by enacting laws like Title IX so that they can have their own spaces. These boys and men have really interfered with girls and women, their ability to get a championship, to get on a sports team, to get scholarships. And not only that, it not just includes sports, but also locker rooms and bathrooms. And we've all heard the stories of what has happened to some of these girls being in locker rooms and bathrooms with boys. Some of them who have assaulted girls, some of them who have threatened to assault girls. There are facts in these cases. In one of these cases that was before the Supreme Court, that one of these boys threatened to do gross and alarming things to the women while they were in the locker room with them. That should stir your conscience as a Christian. That should stir your conscience as an American, frankly, but especially as a Christian. There's real harm here, and we have to recognize it. Now, the last part of evaluating this, we've gone through reverence, identity, conscience. The last one is influence. And influence is concerned with not only who is influencing you, but who you're also influencing. And the most alarming thing about this ideology is the way language is being used here. You see that in U.S. Supreme Court opinions, the justices are calling these males by female pronouns. They're using terms like cisgender, girls, not girls, because that's what girls and women, those are the terms that we're supposed to be using here. Cisgender should not, that term does not belong in the Supreme Court opinion. It does not. And so language is influence. The words that come out of your mouth influence people, and language influences you. And so forcing you to lie by saying a he is a she is power. And no Christian should ever comply with that kind of coercion for any reason. It is not kind. It is not polite. And unfortunately, we're at a place now where we've been pushed and pushed. And now this movement is an example of forced coercion. You know, anyone who defies this is forced to comply. So even the Supreme Court case is an example of that. the states who want to protect girls' sports, they want to protect women and girls, have to justify their protection of that the protection is not a violation of the law when it clearly is not. And so that's an example of this sort of ideological coercion that's going on here. If you have been reading about this issue in the last couple of weeks, you know that New York is wanting to change using the terms mother and father. They don't want to use that in their legislation. Instead, they want to use the terms gestating parent and non-gestating parent. Why are they doing that? Well, they're doing it because they want to eliminate the difference between male and female, because it conflicts with this ideology. When you use the term mother, you're talking about a woman. And when you're using the term father, you're talking about a man. And if you say gestating parent and non-gestating parent, you remove the sex from the phrase, from the language. And that's what you see going on here. When people they don't want to use terms like wife and husband, which I've seen that before too. All of that is designed to control your language, and controlling your language controls your mind, and controlling your mind controls your behavior and your beliefs. And so Christians should be incredibly concerned about what's going on right now. And you should be forceful in avoiding using that language, because it will sway you. It will change what you think about the situation. And the Bible talks about how powerful the tongue is. So, as we come up on America's 250th birthday, remember that we cannot remain a free society and govern based on people's feelings. We cannot make policy based on self-absorption and what people want to be rather than what they are. We have to govern based on principles. And some of those principles include free speech. If you're paying attention to what's going on in the UK right now, you'll see just how bad it can get when a free society governs based on feelings. Right now, people in the UK are being locked up, being sent to prison, being fined for things that they post. And some of those things are regarding this ideology, making these kinds of comments that men cannot be women. Posting those things online can get you in a lot of trouble in the UK right now. And we do not want to live in a society like that here in America. We are unique in terms of our freedom. And that's why so many millions of people want to come to America, is because of the freedom and the opportunities that we have here. And a free country cannot create policy based on feelings. We must create policy based on principles. Doing anything else is a recipe for tyranny. Now, for more on how you can analyze cultural events like a kingdom witness, like I did with this issue, visit the link in the description.